This is American Gothic, perhaps one of the most famous paintings in America. The artist, Grant Wood, grew up in Iowa, in the Cedar Rapids area. Grant Wood had a big influence on American art, helping popularize the regionalist style. He got the idea while studying in Europe.
He came back and said, you know what, we have awesome things here. We should be painting rolling hills and haystacks and barns, and we should be painting our life, what we see around us. And so he began this movement, and the art colony was to teach artists how to paint what they saw and to paint from their own backyard.
Grant Wood was at the height of his fame then, during the height of the Great Depression. That's when he and some friends started the Stone City Art Colony in 1932 to spread the regionalist style. More than 90 students attended that first summer of classes, paying $7.50 per week. One of those students was Isabel Scherer. Isabel was visiting Davenport's Municipal Art Gallery long before it became the Figge, when she heard about the art colony. Even though Isabel earned only $15 a week as a receptionist in a doctor's office, she enrolled.
It was huge for Isabel. I think it made Isabel who she was.
Isabel was a woman whose artistic endeavors began early. One of her first art projects began on a family outing. She and her brother George busied themselves making sculptures with river mud.
They took the clay home, they sculpted it into little figurines and stuffed it in tin cans, and Isabel's thought was, well, you have to fire clay to make it permanent, so they stuck it in the family furnace. And her father found it and was not too happy with Isabel, but she didn't let that keep her back, obviously. She continued on to be a great sculptor.
Another student at the Stone City Art Colony was DeWitt, Iowa native John Bloom. John, too, had begun creating art at a young age.
He used to exhibit his artwork at the Iowa State Fair in Des Moines. And in 1932, he won first place in the art fair with a sculpture named The Wrestlers. And Grant Wood was the judge.
So Grant Wood invited John Bloom to the art colony. But John didn't have enough money for tuition. Still, Grant Wood admired John's talent and wanted him there.
He used to say that Grant Wood told him that he was a much better artist at painting people and drawing people than he was.
So Grant Wood told John he could work as a groundskeeper and attend the art colony for free. That helped John's art and his love life, because that's where he met Isabel Scherer. Isabel was sculpting on the porch of the women's residence, and John had to sweep her shavings off the porch. He teased her that she was making quite a mess for him. Both John and Isabel fondly remembered their time at Stone City. It led to a life of art and eventually a life together. When the art colony ended, John and Grant Wood collaborated on several large murals as parts of government works projects.
I think John liked everything about art. You could put a pencil in his hand and he would start sketching.
With the murals completed, John came to Davenport, and he and Isabel were married. Their first home was the old Masonic Temple in downtown Davenport. It had a very large room that the two artists made into a studio, half for Isabel and half for John. Early on, John dreamed of making art a way of life.
It wasn't very long after that I discovered you couldn't make a living at it. There's a couple-year interval where I was working part-time and painting part-time. It was a busy life, good way to spend it.
I wish John would have painted more after he graduated from, after he worked with Grant. But of course, back then everybody needed work, and John went to work for advertising companies.
Isabel stayed home and kept house. She also kept making art, giving art lessons, and by the 1950s, she was teaching art to a much wider audience with her TV show on WOC, Let's Make Believe.
The first half of the show, she would tell a little story using little puppets and sculptures that she made and a little set that she painted. And the second half of the show, she would demonstrate an art lesson for the kids.
For the Blooms, art was a way of seeing the world. They saw the beauty in everyday things. No matter how busy they got with children and with work, they never stopped creating art, John displaying his vision in his carvings and paintings.
He loved to pick up a brush and to see him paint and dab. You know, the Shocking Oats is a good example. The whole area of the wheat behind the, in the painting, he would work for hours on just the tops of the wheat.
And Isabel continued sculpting. She had loved shaping and molding mud as a child, and this early passion continued all her adult life. John and Isabel didn't have to travel far to find inspiration. John would often go tromping through the woods to find a good block of wood to carve, or he'd take a walk along the river to study the boats, the water, and the people. Or his imagination would be stirred by the area's farmers, their lives, and their animals. Even though he was working full-time, it didn't stop John and his desire to create. On weekends, he kept filling sketchbooks.
I'm a people watcher. I just would draw sketches and then later put them together. This was a scene at St. Joseph's in DeWitt. The women hadn't seen each other for a week, so they stopped to talk right in the doorway.
Well, he had some large bodies in a lot of his works. This, for example, this one here, this is John coming out of the church. And he used to tell Grant Wood that you couldn't get out of church fast enough because of...
For her inspiration, all Isabel had to do was look at the children bustling about. Or she'd glance out her window and gaze at the wonder of nature in her own backyard, loving even the everyday sight of the squirrels.
She sculpted animals around her. She sculpted what she knew and what she saw. And John did the same.
Like John, Isabel used whatever materials she could find, or what was cheap. And cement was cheap. She didn't need expensive equipment or material to create her art. She would recycle everything.
She could take windshield glass, break it up into little pieces, and melt it in the kiln, and they become little gems to use as eyes or ornamentation in her sculptures.
Because Isabel made molds in which to cast the concrete, she had to keep her designs simple. That simplicity became the key to the beauty of Isabel's art. She was able to make simple, uncomplicated lines say so much. As she got older, Isabel sold her very successful art business because she wanted to get back to creating art, the side of her life she loved more than her business side. John and Isabel Bloom spent a lifetime seeing beauty in everyday things, in the life and the objects around them. They used everyday materials to bring that art to us and to future generations. And even when they were busy as young parents and then way past retirement age, Isabel was still sculpting and John was still painting. They never lost their passion for creating art, a passion they developed when they were young and that lasted a lifetime.